Hello, everyone. This is William K. Murtaugh, Mert Witness 1. And today, among other subjects, we are going to discuss Lawrence Hoff. Now, some of you out there are going to be asking, who in the hell is Lawrence Hoff? Well, you already know Lawrence. But before I go into exactly who Lawrence is, I'm going to discuss his background a little bit. Lawrence Hoff was adopted. And because this is a rather delicate subject, I want to clear something off at the onset. Someone choosing to adopt out or give away something they created in a majority of cases is a very hard decision to make. There are circumstances that simply happen that cause the birth parent or birth parents to make that horrific decision to give up their child and to place the rest of the child's life in the hands of someone else. In most cases, it's a stranger. In a lot of cases, adoptions are closed. But in the case of Lawrence Hoff, it was an open adoption. He knew his birth name. I don't know if he knows much about his birth parents. He doesn't speak of his birth parents. He speaks, to some extent, of his adoptive parents, maybe of his sister. It's unknown if the sister was adopted by from the same parents, I should say, or she was the birth daughter of Lawrence Hoff's adoptive parents. But for whatever reason, Lawrence Hoff was placed into a home of two very loving people who themselves made a sacrifice. These are people that wanted to care for and love a child, and they took in the child of a stranger, or perhaps someone they knew of the circumstances that dictated that the child needed to be adopted, and they stepped forward to offer to do that. It's a big step for a family to take, and it was a big gesture on the part of the adoptive parents to do this. But the adoption of Lawrence Hoff is at the core of a lot of things that are going on today. It may be a part of why Lawrence Hoff does the things that he does, says the things that he does, and makes the claims that he does. For Lawrence Hoff is someone that we currently know as Timothy Charles Holmseth. And it is this adoption that may explain a lot about why and how Timothy Charles Holmseth says and does what he does. Timothy filed a rather odd document with the Minnesota court when he was first incarcerated. Actually, he didn't file the paperwork. He had someone write it for him on his behalf. Someone that was acting in loose terms as his lawyer. This person filed this document, and it was in this document that we find out that Timothy Charles Holmseth was actually born Lawrence Hoff, that Timothy Charles Holmseth was adopted by a couple who owned and operated a small grocery store in the city where Tim Holmseth was raised. Now, some people react differently to being adopted. They may respect the parents for adopting them, and they may understand that for some reason the parents that put them up for adoption were forced to do so. Other people that are adopted resent the fact that the adoptive parents adopted them, or that the parents that gave up this individual may have done it for reasons that the adoptee disagrees with. Now, Tim Holmseth rarely talks about his adoption. He mentioned it in his book, I believe, and he mentioned it in this legal paperwork. But you don't hear much about it. He tends not to broach on the subject. And it's understandable. A lot of adoptive children don't like to talk about it. But it's not to say that being adopted is a bad thing and putting a child up for adoption is a bad thing. It's a tough decision to make. But in the case of Timothy Charles Holmseth, one has to examine how he has dealt with this fact over the years, because of what he gets involved in. And one of the biggest conspiracy theories that he puts out on the internet, and that is of these fake adoption rings. People kidnapping children, selling children to adoption syndicates. This is one of the first things that came out in his book and in his series when it came to Haley Cummings. He has long argued that Hillary Clinton and other people were involved with stealing babies, running them through adoption mills, and selling them. And he contended this is what happened to Haley Cummings and other children. He expanded his theories as time went on to get into satanic ritual abuse, child trafficking, and other things, again going back to the same suspects. He kept changing his narrative, or expanding on his narrative. And this is what happened with Haley Cummings. And it's also what's happened with subsequent cases that Tim Holmseth has gotten involved in. He's gone from kidnapping for purposes of selling a baby into adoption into getting into child trafficking, sex trafficking, pedophilia, and satanic ritual abuse. And while some of this may have been to garner money from people or fame or fortune, it also might be an underlying reaction to the fact that he's an adopted child. That there is something in the adoption of Lawrence Hoff and converting him over into Timothy Charles Holmseth that affected Holmseth as he grew older. We saw early signs, as he pointed out in his book, of this, because he was, ever so briefly, a pyromaniac. He liked to play with fire. He got caught playing with fire. As he grew older, his misconduct grew gradually more serious. He began to abuse alcohol, possibly other drugs, and he did so to the point where he almost died. This was the premise for the prelude in his book entitled Hell. He went through an experience that he claims to have had, a dream, a nightmare, and he described it in rather disgusting terms. And this experience was due to an overdose or to the excessive consumption of alcohol to the point where it nearly killed him. And he claims to be a reformed alcoholic, that he has given up the consumption of alcohol and so forth, and that he doesn't abuse any drugs. Now, the only problem with this is Tim Holmseth was around 27 years old when all this took place. He was relatively young. And if he had been abusing drugs for any period of time, we're talking about he might have started drinking heavily before he was of legal age. He met his mothers of his children at bars. At least one of these women was a one-night stand. And as far as I can find out, Tim Holmseth has never been legally married. So this would indicate that Holmseth may have suffered some neurological damage due to all this excessive drinking. And this may have led to his activities involving missing children. You know, earlier in his life, Tim Holmseth may have tried to live a normal life, be like the rest of us, go out and get a job, earn a living, contribute to society in some fashion. But at some point, his life turned. It changed. He got involved with these prominent missing children cases. Children that had been murdered, children that had been abused. And he first came to attention on a fairly wide scale at the core of everything he's done since. And he's mentioned other cases as time went along. And he's gotten deeply involved in cases as time went on. He got involved, as we know, with the Haley Cummings case. Wrote a book about it. He wrote a book about the Casey Anthony case. Less is known about that book than his Haley Cummings book. And he also got involved with the Waterling case. And he got involved with the Waterling case to the extent, if not more, than he did with the Haley Cummings case. And as it turns out, he did a lot of damage to the Waterling case in the same manner as he did to the Haley Cummings case. There is a lot I am learning about the Waterling case. And it's one of these things I'm going to be discussing in detail in the coming weeks as more and more information comes my way. And something else has come out in the Waterling case, in the Cummings case, even in the Jan Buddy Ramsey case. And that is that Tim Holmseth hasn't been acting alone. He's not a one-man band. He's not this investigative journalist that somehow found all this information out and is reporting it and taking all the credit himself. Turns out that Timothy Charles Holmseth is a puppet. He's being manipulated by this group. At first, I thought he was being manipulated by Field McConnell. Now, Field McConnell is contributing to this mess. Field McConnell is part of the problem. Field McConnell is an enabler. But Field McConnell himself is also a puppet who's being manipulated. Kirk Pendergrass. Now, Kirk Pendergrass isn't so much a puppet as he is an interloper. He got involved in all of this, but he's something of an also-ran. He's tolerated because he believes in the same thing that Field McConnell and Tim Holmseth believes in, and he's what some might describe as a useful idiot. But he's not a key player. He's not the coordinator. He's not the puppet master. There's somebody in the background pulling the strings and spending a lot of money, making it possible for Tim to remain free, which, by the way, wasn't the original intention. See, there's something else that people may not realize here. I know that people have suspected it. I saw one comment on my blog, or not on my blog, but on my YouTube, where someone made that comment, and it may have just hit the nail on the head. And it may be as true today as it was back then. That the intention of the puppet master is not to free Timothy Charles Holmseth, get him out of jail, get him out of his situation. And that goal may not be the same for Field McConnell either. It may not be the goal of everyone to get Field McConnell out of jail, to get him out of his situation, to help him straighten his life out. The reverse is actually quite possible. That Field McConnell is deliberately being allowed to rot in jail. That Field McConnell is being manipulated. People are taking advantage of Field McConnell's philosophy and have advised him against getting a bar licensed attorney. They have advised Field McConnell against getting someone who could get him out of his situation with the Internal Revenue Service and with the state property tax issue that he has, and to be able to keep his house. Now, why would people be doing this? Why would people want Field McConnell in prison to come to the state of Florida, be tried, and probably be put in prison for the remainder of his life? And the answer is quite simple, is that they want to make a martyr out of both of these people. They want to make a martyr out of Timothy Charles Holmseth, and they want to make a martyr out of Field McConnell. Because Field McConnell and Tim Holmseth being martyrs is an asset. It's a tool. It's a thing of value. Because you have these two heroes locked up being persecuted by this illegitimate corporate government, by the kangaroo courts, by this system of maritime law and Shira law and all this gobbledygook terminology that's being thrown around like seeds in a farm. The crop here is sovereign citizen propaganda. And it can be seen in the document that was presented in the case of Timothy Charles Holmseth. The entire document is sovereign citizenry. Timothy Charles Holmseth disputed the birth certificate that has the name Timothy Charles Holmseth on it. He recognizes himself as Lawrence Hoff. This was to the extent where he took his surname and gave it to his son, so that the Hoff legacy would remain in some form, and that it would be in court records that there is a Hoff that exists within Timmy's sphere influence. So we have someone in the background who's behind all this, who is spending the money, who is garnering the resources. Now, some have suggested that there's a man out there by the name of Mr. Straight that has something to do with all of this. And there's been allegations made about Mr. Straight. That Mr. Straight is alleged to be the person claiming to be the number 2 man, the man with direct contact with the President of the United States. And it is through Mr. Straight that Timothy Charles Holmseth is supposed to be getting all this information to be fed to whoever listens to him or reads what he writes. That Mr. Straight is the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force. It would make a lot of sense. It would explain things, because in reality, you wonder how Tim Holmseth could come up with such elaborate nonsense. And he's never mentioned this before, up until he met Mr. Steele. All Tim Holmseth claimed to be was a protected informant for the FBI, for the Department of Justice. At some point, a congressional witness was his designation. His importance grew over the years. But now, all of a sudden, Tim Holmseth finds himself a material witness for some international tribunal for which Robert David Steele is associated with. So now Tim Holmseth is an international celebrity. Tim Holmseth is going to go over to Europe, and he's going to testify in this very important hearing about his part in investigating what's happened to all these children. It never materialized. Tim Holmseth never went anywhere except to jail. No explanations as to why all of a sudden this all-important hearing evaporated. It just left. It was no more. So what's the next step for Timothy Charles Holmseth, other than to sue a couple people for trying to point all this out, which is exactly what he did. He sued me, and he sued Kim, who he's been after for a decade. Didn't get anywhere. The case got thrown out. The lawyer isn't allowed to practice in the state of Florida. They used a ruse to get the case heard in Virginia. But the problem they found out really quick is if they're going to sue someone that lives in the state of Florida, they have to use a lawyer that practices law in the state of Florida. And so it got thrown out. And subsequent to the lawsuit, Tim Holmseth has basically proven everything that I have said over the last 10 years. So if this goes to court again, all I do is I bring in everything that Tim Charles Holmseth has written and said about me and everybody else, and he's going to lose the case. Because we're arguing about things that he actually said. We got foundational evidence that says, here, Tim, you said this about me. You accused me of these things. You've got me accused of all this. And all I'm doing is protecting my good name. You know, I'm exercising my rights under the Constitution of the United States. Case closed. So, the lawsuit didn't work out. Now, quite magically, Field McConnell shows up. Tim Holmseth meets Field McConnell. Tim Holmseth meets Kirk Pendergrass. And all of a sudden, Tim Holmseth is part of the Pentagon Pedophile Task Force. And also the Children's Crusade. Yeah, it's as if suddenly someone just out of the blue in the United States government, without any announcement of any kind, there was no press conference. Donald J. Trump did not get up behind the presidential seal of the United States and say that there is a Pentagon Pedophile Task Force and we're going to start dealing with this stuff. Not one word, except by Timothy Charles Holmseth, who is supposed to be the press secretary for this organization. An unemployed pizza delivery driver from a small town in the Midwest is a spokesman for a powerful government task force. And we're supposed to believe this. We're supposed to believe that Field McConnell has a personal relationship with the President of the United States and the First Lady, yet we never hear any of this out of the mouth of President Donald J. Trump. This is supposed to be the case, even though both of these individuals have been in jail, have had horrific negative experiences in their lives for the past 3 years. Timothy Charles Holmseth went to jail on the first of 4 convictions. Not a word was heard from President Donald J. Trump or anybody else in the government for that matter. Timothy Charles Holmseth was talked into not showing up in court and is now a fugitive from justice. Nothing is heard from the President of the United States. Field McConnell is in a severe economic situation. We don't hear from the President of the United States. Field McConnell is in jail, charged with multiple felonies. We don't hear from the President of the United States. Field McConnell is fighting extradition to the state of Florida to be tried on these charges. We don't hear from the President of the United States. Instead, we hear from an individual that calls himself the Postmaster of the World. Now, first of all, there is no such thing as a Postmaster of the World. All some guy did is he just decided one day he's going to be Postmaster of the World, and he became Postmaster of the World. And this is also a guy, from what I understand, that tried to take out a patent for the United States flag. Or for his name. And you gotta wonder about somebody like that. But that's what's being said, is that this guy actually tried to put a patent on the United States flag. Even though the flag is manufactured under, the United States government allows people to make the flag, but you can't copyright it, you can't patent it. A patent is if you invent something like the telephone or the television set. You get a patent for that. You don't get a patent for a flag. Now, you can get a copyright for a flag. If you go out and create a flag of your own design, you can copyright it, but you can't trademark it. So number one, the guy got his terms backwards, or whoever came up with this got it backwards. Because we're not talking about a patent, we're talking about a trademark, and you can't trademark an American flag. Or any flag that has to do with a government agency, a state flag, military flags, so on and so forth. You can't trademark them and you can't patent them. Because they belong to the people. Now, this postmaster of the world seems to think that he's going to march into a local sheriff's office, hand over a piece of paper that says, you need to deliver this to Field McConnell. He needs to sign it. And once Field McConnell signs it, you're supposed to let him out of jail. On whose authority? President Trump didn't give anybody any authority. President Trump could make a phone call and get him out of jail in 2 seconds. So nobody has yet to explain, or I've yet to see, what the legal basis was for this clown to think that he could march into a sheriff's office and demand the release of someone that hasn't even gone to trial yet. The guy is not a lawyer. The guy is just somebody that has gotten into trouble repeatedly with the courts, and for whatever stupid reason decided he was going to march into a local sheriff's station and demand that Field McConnell be released. And he used this stupid piece of paper as an excuse to do that. Come 1st of January forward, we look into all these things, find out just exactly what the hell is going on, and why these people are doing what they're doing, and why they're destroying lives, apparently without any conscience, any lack of caring, making threats, saying that if you don't, we're going to do this, that, or the other thing, a kind of blackmail to get people to hand over documents they have no business having, getting involved in an open investigation having to do with the death of a child, making statements that are completely false, obliterating the facts in this ongoing investigation. That's what's being alleged. The evidence of this kind of behavior is coming out gradually. And we're going to learn in 2020 that there's more going on here than just an unemployed pizza delivery driver getting himself over his head with his conspiracy theories. That there is a well-organized criminal enterprise making money off of missing, abused, and murdered children. And that is a deliberate enterprise to make money. It is not an enterprise to seek the truth. It's an enterprise to push forward conspiracy theories that have no merit. even if that means adding to the emotional heartache of those involved with the people that are the victims of various criminal acts. They're just out for their own means. Their fame, their fortune, their attention. And it's something that really needs to be stopped. If we can't stop all of it, we can at least stop some of it. To expose and stop the criminal actions of these people before they do more damage. And to allow the victims of their heinous acts to heal and to move on as best they can. So this is going to be one of the goals of 2020 forward, is to expose these people for who they are, explain what they've done and why, and see what we can do to stop them. And with that, this is William K. Murtaugh, Mert Witness 1, wishing everybody a Happy New Year, and have a good one.